I froze in horror as the police officer loaded my blind son's guide dog into his patrol car. My 16-year-old boy sat sobbing on our front lawn, helpless without Cooper, while our HOA president smirked with satisfaction. 20 years enforcing federal law. And now, I was watching it being trampled in my own front yard. What would you do if someone tried to steal your disabled child's lifeline and thought they could get away with it? After my son Michael lost his sight in a car accident last year, Cooper became his connection to independence. That golden retriever wasn't just a pet. He was Michael's eyes, his confidence, his bridge to a world suddenly turned dark at 16. As a widowed father raising a disabled teen, I sought a peaceful community where we could rebuild our shattered lives. Pine Grove Estates seemed perfect with its tree-lined streets and excellent schools. The sales agent boasted about their tight-knit community and well-managed association. I deliberately kept my profession private during our interviews with the HOA board, wanting us to be treated like any other family, not given special treatment because of my position on the federal bench. We'd only been in our new home for 2 weeks when Michael finally felt confident enough to venture into the neighborhood with Cooper. Watching them from the porch, my son's hand resting on his guide dog's harness, his steps becoming more assured, I thought we'd finally found healing. Little did I know that this simple act of independence would trigger a campaign of cruelty that would test not only my patience as a father, but the very limits of my judicial restraint. The letter arrived exactly 3 days after Cooper's first neighborhood walk, slipped under our door like some kind of covert threat. Violation: unauthorized animal on premises. $750 fine. Immediate removal required. The paper trembled in my hands, not from fear, but from a growing rage I hadn't felt since presiding over civil rights violations in my courtroom. I immediately called an emergency meeting with the HOA board, Cooper's service animal certification and ADA documentation in hand. Their president, Margaret Wilson, barely glanced at the papers before sliding them back across the table with manicured fingernails. Your situation doesn't exempt you from our covenant, she said, her eyes narrowing at Michael, who sat quietly beside me, Cooper perfectly still at his feet. Some residents find certain disabilities unsettling. The visibility of it all. The Americans with Disabilities Act specifically protects service animals. I explained calmly, years of judicial composure keeping my voice level. Federal law supersedes HOA regulations. Margaret exchanged glances with her board members. We've had other residents attempt to claim special status before, Mr. Parker. This is an exclusive community. Rules maintain our standards. That's Judge Parker, corrected one of the board members quietly, recognition dawning on his face. Margaret's eyebrow arched slightly. Your profession doesn't grant exemptions here. This isn't your courtroom. She leaned forward, lowering her voice. Besides, there are plenty of appropriate communities for people with special needs. Perhaps Pine Grove isn't the right fit for your situation. As we left, Michael whispered, Dad, why do they hate Cooper so much? I couldn't tell him the truth. That Cooper wasn't the problem. In Margaret's eyes, it was Michael's disability that threatened her perfect community. I placed my hand on his shoulder, making a silent promise that I wouldn't let their prejudice drive us from our home. What followed was a calculated campaign of intimidation that would have impressed even the most seasoned prosecutors I'd worked alongside. Security cameras coincidentally installed facing our home. Neighbors suddenly documenting our every move. Smartphones raised whenever Michael and Cooper stepped outside. 3 anonymous calls to animal control claimed Cooper was aggressive toward children. All dismissed after inspectors found a perfectly trained service animal. But each visit left Michael more anxious, more reluctant to leave our home. When Michael attempted to join neighborhood teens at the community pool, Margaret personally intervened, loudly announcing that his special needs required parental supervision at all times. She made a show of escorting him out, explaining to onlookers that liability concerns necessitated such measures. I don't understand, Dad. Michael said that night, his voice breaking. I've never done anything to these people. Cooper never barks or causes problems. I documented everything meticulously, just as I would prepare evidence for a federal case. Voice recordings, emails, photographs, witness statements from the few sympathetic neighbors brave enough to speak with us. A federal judge knows exactly what constitutes harassment and discrimination. But I said nothing about my profession yet. Strategic silence was my advantage. The HOA began issuing new emergency regulations targeting us specifically. All animals must be registered with DNA samples. Residents with special accommodations must submit monthly medical verification. Specially trained animals must wear muzzles in common areas. Each violation carried increasing fines, now totaling thousands. When I formally contested them, Margaret responded with a letter stating, "The board finds your constant complaints disruptive to community harmony. Further disputes may result in lien proceedings." One evening, I found Michael sitting alone in the dark, Cooper's head in his lap. "They want us gone because I'm blind, don't they?" he asked quietly. That night, I made 2 calls, one to my clerk to clear my docket for the coming storm, and another to a civil rights attorney colleague. Margaret Wilson had no idea what she had set in motion. Yesterday began like any ordinary Tuesday. Michael had a mobility training session after school, so I dropped him and Cooper off before heading to court. I was presiding over a complex interstate commerce case, the kind that requires complete focus, when my clerk rushed in during a brief recess, phone in hand. "Judge Parker, it's an emergency. Your son just called from your home number." Michael's voice trembled through the speaker. "Dad, they're here, police and animal control. Margaret is saying Cooper attacked someone. They're trying to take him away. I don't know what to do." I could hear the commotion in the background, multiple voices, Cooper's confused whining, and Margaret's shrill accusations cutting through it all. "Michael, stay calm. Put Cooper on his lead and show them his service vest and ID. I'll be there in 15 minutes. Don't let them take him without proper documentation." As I raced home, pieces of Margaret's plan became clear. She had orchestrated an emergency HOA vote regarding dangerous animals precisely when she knew I'd be in court. The community newsletter announced it with barely 24 hours' notice, a copy deliberately misdelivered to our neighbor's mailbox instead of ours. Then she made her checkmate move, calling police with claims that Cooper had threatened a child during his morning walk. No witnesses, no evidence, just her word against the disabled teenagers. By the time I turned onto our street, a small crowd had gathered. Officer Bryant stood beside his patrol vehicle, its rear door open, Cooper already halfway loaded inside. A tearful Michael sat disoriented on our front lawn, reaching desperately into empty air, his white cane thrown carelessly aside. The dog lunged at the Peterson boy. Margaret was telling the gathering neighbors, her voice pitched to Carrie. "We've had concerns for months. Just because the child is blind doesn't mean we should risk community safety." Several neighbors nodded in agreement. Mrs. Peterson stood nervously nearby, her young son hiding behind her legs, clearly coached for this performance. He growled at my son. She offered weakly when noticed my arrival. "We were just walking by and—" "That's impossible," Michael cried from the ground. "Cooper was on my left side the entire time. He never breaks position. He's trained to—" "See how emotional the boy gets?" Margaret interrupted. "This is exactly the kind of instability we're concerned about." I approached slowly, taking in every detail, Officer Bryant's uncomfortable expression, the animal control van waiting at the curb, Margaret's triumphant smile, and my son's tears. 15 years on the federal bench had taught me the importance of timing. I needed to see exactly how far they would go, exactly who was involved before I reveal my hand. "Officer," I said calmly, "may I ask what's happening here?" "Sir, we've received reports of an aggressive animal. I'm just following protocol." Margaret stepped forward. "Finally, we're addressing the situation. You were warned, Mr. Parker. Rules exist for everyone's protection." I looked at my son, reaching blindly for his guide dog, his entire world being torn away by neighborhood prejudice disguised as policy. Something in me shifted irrevocably. "You should have followed the rules from the beginning," Margaret shouted, pointing dramatically at Cooper, who sat perfectly behaved despite the chaos. Special treatment leads to chaos. First dogs, then who knows what kind of people move in next. The crowd murmured agreement. Several neighbors nodded, smartphones recording the scene. Officer Bryant looked increasingly uncomfortable, but continued the procedure, checking Cooper's tags and preparing the paperwork for animal control. "There's a process for requesting accommodation," Margaret continued, playing to her audience. "You can't just move in and expect everyone to change for you. This neighborhood has standards." Michael's silent tears as he reached blindly for his missing companion broke something fundamental inside me. I watched his fingers grasp empty air where Cooper should have been, his security and independence being stripped away by small-minded cruelty masquerading as community standards. Mrs. Davidson, our elderly neighbor, finally spoke up. "Margaret, this is going too far. The boy needs his dog. Stay out of this, Helen," Margaret snapped. "Your property values are at stake, too. Do you want to live next to a—" She caught herself, but the implication hung in the air. This wasn't about rules or property values. It was about who Margaret deemed acceptable in her perfect community. "Officer," I said, stepping forward, "before you continue, I'd like to understand the specific complaint that authorized seizure of a service animal." "Sir, I have a report of aggressive behavior toward a minor," Officer Bryant replied, though his voice lacked conviction. "When a service animal displays aggression, we're required to, and what evidence supports this claim?" I asked, my courtroom voice emerging naturally. "Any witnesses besides the complainant? Any history of previous incidents? Any actual contact or injury?" Officer Bryant shifted uncomfortably. "Well, no physical contact was reported, but he bared his teeth at my boy," Mrs. Peterson interjected, nudging her son forward. "Tell the officer, Tommy." The child looked confused. The dog looked at me. I noticed Michael's hands clenching into fists, his breathing becoming erratic, signs of an anxiety attack I'd seen too often since his accident. Cooper strained toward him from the patrol car, sensing his distress. 15 years of judicial restraint evaporated in an instant. "Officer Bryant," I said, voice deadly calm, "I have some information that will significantly change how you proceed in the next 30 seconds. Margaret stepped between us. "Don't try to intimidate him. The law is clear about dangerous animals." "Yes," I replied, meeting her gaze directly. "The law is absolutely clear, and you're about to learn exactly how clear it is." The crowd fell silent, sensing the shift in power. Someone whispered, "Who is this guy?" Margaret smirked. "Just another resident who thinks rules don't apply to his family's." Situation. That word, dripping with condescension, was the final catalyst. I removed my overcoat, revealing the suit I'd worn to court that morning, and reached for my credentials. I approached Officer Bryant, maintaining the measured pace I used when delivering consequential rulings. The crowd parted instinctively, something in my demeanor commanding their attention. "Officer, I'm Federal Judge Samuel Parker, Eastern District," I stated, presenting my credentials. "That service animal is protected under the Americans with Disabilities Act, and what's happening here constitutes criminal discrimination against a disabled minor." The crowd fell silent. Officer Bryant's eyes widened as he examined my identification. "Furthermore," I continued, my voice carrying across the now-hushed gathering, "I've been recording and documenting this entire harassment campaign for the past 3 months. Today's events now constitute evidence in what will become a federal civil rights violation case." Margaret's face transformed from smugness to horror as the implications dawned on her. "You never said you were a judge," she stammered. "And you never said you were targeting my son because of his disability," I replied. "Yet here we are." I turned to address the neighbors directly. "For those recording this incident, I encourage you to continue. You're documenting multiple federal violations, including conspiracy to violate civil rights, discrimination under the ADA, and harassment of a protected individual. Officer Bryant immediately stepped back from his vehicle. Judge Parker, I was informed this was an unlicensed, aggressive animal. Had I known, I understand you were misled, I said. But I'm curious why standard procedure for verifying service animal status wasn't followed before attempting removal. He paled visibly. Sir, I deeply apologize. This should never have happened. Cooper bolted from the patrol car directly to Michael, pressing against him as my son wrapped his arms around his guide dog, relief washing over his face. Margaret Wilson, I continued, turning back to her, you deliberately scheduled today's emergency HOA meeting during court hours. You falsified reports to animal control. You've engaged in systematic discrimination against a disabled minor. Each of these actions carries significant penalties under federal law. She backed away, looking desperately at her neighbors for support, but found only shocked faces. This is absurd, she sputtered. We have HOA regulations that clearly state, no private regulation supersedes federal law, I interrupted. Something you've been reminded of multiple times in writing. Suddenly, 3 neighbors stepped forward, the Johnsons, whose adopted children had been denied pool access. Mr. Rivera, whose mother's wheelchair ramp had been cited as a visual nuisance, and Mrs. Patel, whose religious holiday decorations had resulted in escalating fines. It wasn't just them, Mrs. Patel said quietly. She's been doing this to many of us. Margaret's carefully constructed facade crumbled completely as she realized the extent of her miscalculation. This is my community, she hissed. I've worked for years to maintain its standards. Your vendetta just triggered a federal investigation into this entire HOA, I stated firmly. Everyone involved will be subpoenaed. I suggest you contact legal counsel immediately. Officer Bryant's training kicked in instantly. Sir, I'm releasing the service animal back to your son immediately, he said, securing the patrol car door. I'll need to file a corrected report documenting the situation. Cooper pressed against Michael's leg, resuming his guide position as if nothing had happened. My son's face showed the first relief I'd seen in months. Officer Bryant, I said, maintaining my professional demeanor, I'd like to formally file a report concerning systematic harassment of a disabled minor. I have documentation of 6 false reports filed by Ms. Wilson, constituting both harassment and filing false statements to law enforcement. I handed him a USB drive. This contains 3 months of evidence, time-stamped recordings of HOA meetings where my son's disability was explicitly discussed as undesirable, emails revealing coordination of today's events, and witness statement from residents who've experienced similar discrimination. Margaret attempted to interject, but her voice lacked its former authority. This is a private community matter. This stopped being private when you weaponized law enforcement against a disabled child, I countered. Each person who participated in today's events is potentially liable in both criminal and civil proceedings. The crowd began to disperse, neighbors suddenly eager to distance themselves from Margaret. 3 remained, the Johnsons, Mr. Rivera, and Mrs. Patel. Judge Parker, Mrs. Johnson said quietly, we've experienced similar treatment. Our adopted children were banned from community activities because they didn't match the neighborhood aesthetic. My mother's wheelchair ramp resulted in daily fines until she stopped visiting, Mr. Rivera added. Margaret said it advertised infirmity to potential homebuyers. As they shared their stories, I noticed other neighbors pausing, listening. The dam was breaking. Margaret's face flushed with anger. You're all exaggerating. I've maintained property values for everyone. Without proper standards, this neighborhood would collapse. Standards? Mrs. Patel questioned. Or prejudice? My Diwali decorations were cited as excessive, while Christmas displays 3 times larger received community awards. Officer Bryant, now fully comprehending the situation, turned to Margaret. Ma'am, I'll need you to come to the station to make a formal statement about today's complaint. That won't be necessary, she protested. I'm withdrawing the complaint. That's not how this works, Officer Bryant replied. Filing a false police report is a criminal offense. As Margaret was escorted to the patrol car, her phone rang incessantly, board members realizing their liability. The power she had wielded so ruthlessly for years evaporated in minutes. A text message circulated through the neighborhood within the hour. Emergency community meeting, 7 p.m., clubhouse. By then, everyone knew exactly who I was and what had happened. The carefully maintained facade of Pine Grove Estates was crumbling, revealing the rot beneath. The emergency community meeting that night was standing room only. Neighbors who had avoided eye contact for months now approached us with apologies and outrage. The clubhouse buzzed with decades of buried grievances suddenly finding voice. Margaret arrived flanked by 2 board members. Her composure recovered, but her authority shattered. She took position at the podium as if this were any normal HOA meeting. Today's unfortunate incident has been resolved, she began, voice clipped. Officer Bryant misunderstood community protocols regarding animals. We've clarified that's not true. The officer himself interrupted from the back. I was explicitly told to remove a dangerous animal. The complaint came directly from you, Ms. Wilson. Before Margaret could respond, Mrs. Davidson, our 78-year-old neighbor, stood shakily. For 3 years, I've been fined for having my grandson visit more than twice monthly. Margaret said children reduced the community's mature atmosphere. One by one, residents rose to speak. The Hernandez family denied permission to build a safety fence after their toddler wandered toward the pond. Dr. Wainwright, whose home-based medical practice for terminal patients resulted in vehicles being towed as commercial activity. A dozen more stories followed, each more disturbing than the last. This is absurd, Margaret protested. These measures protected our property values and community standards. A former board member stood, visibly nervous. I resigned last year because I couldn't stomach it anymore. Margaret explicitly said at a closed meeting that the right kind of residents don't need accommodations. She instructed us to find any violation possible for households that didn't fit the neighborhood profile. Profile? Someone asked. You know exactly what she meant, the former member replied. Young families were too noisy. Ethnic foods created offensive odors. Religious minorities had excessive gatherings. Disabilities were visual disruptions. Margaret lunged for the microphone. These accusations are defamatory. I've dedicated years to maintaining this community's prestige. By bullying the vulnerable, I stated, rising from my seat, I could pursue federal charges against this entire HOA for systematic civil rights violations. The evidence I've collected would be compelling in court. The room fell silent. But prosecution isn't my primary goal, I continued. My son and I moved here seeking community, not conflict. What happens next is up to all of you. The vote was unprecedented in Pine Grove's history. Unanimous dissolution of the current board, freezing of all HOA funds pending investigation, and formation of a resident committee to establish new governance. As Margaret stormed out, her real estate business already collapsing as word spread through neighboring communities, I noticed something remarkable. Residents who had never spoken were introducing themselves to each other, exchanging contact information, making plans. Dad, Michael whispered beside me. Cooper steady at his side. What's happening now? I described the scene. Elderly residents offering rides to younger neighbors. Families exchanging phone numbers. A community emerging from the shadow of fear. I told him, we're finally meeting our neighbors. Rather than pursuing maximum penalties, I offered the community a choice, prosecution or reformation. The legal path forward was clear. Multiple federal violations with substantial evidence would result in crippling fines and potential criminal charges for several board members. But Michael reminded me of something I'd told him after his accident. Justice isn't about punishment, it's about restoration. Led by residents who had stood with us that pivotal day, Pine Grove began its remarkable transformation. A diverse governance committee drafted new bylaws with transparency and inclusion as core principles. Every regulation was reviewed through the lens of one simple question. Does this serve all residents or only some? The clubhouse, once reserved exclusively for approved gatherings, became a true community center. Senior residents who had been isolated found companionship. Families with special needs, previously unwelcome, formed support networks. Cultural celebrations, once deemed disruptive, became community-wide events celebrating our diversity. Michael, finding unexpected purpose in his experience, established a youth advocacy program. Teenagers who had witnessed his humiliation now learned from him about disability rights and community responsibility. Under his guidance, they developed an accessibility initiative that would later be adopted by neighborhoods across the county. Cooper, once branded a threat, became the neighborhood's beloved mascot. Children who had been taught to fear him now learned proper interaction with service animals. His daily rounds with Michael became a welcome sight rather than cause for suspicion. The most profound change came in unexpected ways. Mr. Chun, previously fined for his excessive gardening, now taught community classes in his spectacular backyard. Mrs. Rivera's mother, once unwelcome due to her wheelchair, became the beloved organizer of neighborhood history projects. The Johnsons' adopted children formed a multicultural youth committee that organized our first community festival. Margaret's former allies approached me privately, one by one, with confessions and apologies. Many had simply feared becoming targets themselves. Others had never realized the extent of the discrimination. All expressed the same sentiment. We didn't know how to stop it. 6 months after that confrontation on our lawn, I watched from our porch as Michael and Cooper led a community walk promoting disability awareness. Dozens of neighbors, many who had witnessed his humiliation that day, now walked beside him, listening attentively as he navigated with confidence. "Your Honor," Mrs. Davidson said, joining me on the porch, "I never thought I'd live to see Pine Grove become a real community." "Please," I smiled, "it's just Sam now." "Not to us," she replied. "You reminded us that justice isn't just something that happens in courtrooms. Sometimes it happens right where we live. When power is abused, it's not enough to simply punish the guilty. True justice creates something better from the wreckage." That day could have ended with federal charges, lawsuits, and a community torn apart. Instead, it became the catalyst for transformation. Today, Pine Grove Estates stands as testimony that confronting discrimination doesn't just protect the vulnerable, it liberates everyone. Neighbors who once avoided eye contact now greet each other by name. The community that Margaret claimed to protect through exclusion has flourished through inclusion. As for Margaret, last I heard, she's facing multiple civil suits and mandatory sensitivity training. Her real estate license was suspended pending investigation into discriminatory practices. The final irony? Property values in Pine Grove have increased significantly since our inclusive community model received regional recognition. Michael recently told me something profound. "Dad, losing my sight taught me that we don't always get to choose our challenges, but we do choose how they change us." My son's courage in the face of cruelty changed not just him, but an entire community. Remember, those who misuse authority against the vulnerable never anticipate the day when true power reveals itself. The power of justice, compassion, and community standing as one.